proyecto dedicado a la divulgación, formación y terapia psicológica. Consulta nuestros servicios en nuestra web y redes sociales.
But in any case, one of the other things that I've worried about a bit over the years is the poverty of the stimulus. And let me try this out to be sure that my understanding of the way you introduced the idea of the poverty of the stimulus was that the child has to be exposed somehow to these contrasts, including some things that are totally ungrammatical and would never, but some of these the child will never have heard. But because of the way the language is structured and organized, if the child should be exposed to this, the child will recognize this as an ungrammatical sentence. Yet there's many kinds of learning phenomena that people have studied in which you don't need you don't need to be exposed to many of the negative instances. It only takes one contrast. So, for example, if you let me use as the example the spectrum. You can raise a duckling in monochromatic light, so it never sees anything but this one yellow. And then after it's had that training, after it's had that history, it's never seen different colors, unless maybe there is some contrast effects that come out. But you now teach it to peck a disc when the key is yellow and not to peck the disc when the key is blue. And what you'll find is its pecking then is in an orderly way responsive to the entire spectrum. So that just creating that one contrast between two colors is enough to then tap into the structure of the spectrum. Is that a decent analogy to the kinds of things you'd say about grammatical structure? That you get a couple of examples, and because of the structure of these particular utterances, you will have an orderly set of relations among the ones, including those you haven't even ever heard before?
Well, the examples of the ungrammatical sentences were just illustrations of the fact that poverty of stimulus is overwhelming. The child doesn't use negative examples in acquiring a language.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, there's pretty good evidence by now that children learn language from positive examples only. They don't pay attention to corrections. If you've had a young child, you've had that experience, just ignores when you try to correct it. It just pays attention to whatever data is going on in the ambient language, and its instinctive capacities just create a language out of it. The poverty of stimulus is so overwhelming that you just don't need evidence for it anymore. By now, we know that children of 2 or 3 years old have virtually acquired the essential characters of the languages, can be shown by experiment, even though they have
I'm totally.
It goes way beyond the evidence available to them. And in fact, by now, statistical studies of evidence available, which you can do these days, Charles Yang's work, show that it's extremely impoverished. If you bring into account Zipf's law, the rank frequency laws, you find that trigrams are all totally missing, bigrams are rare. What the child knows goes vastly beyond anything that's experienced. And most of it is just coming from the inside. So the questions of poverty of stimulus, in my view, barely have to be discussed anymore, because the evidence is so overwhelming that what the child knows is far beyond, vastly beyond any possible data it had. All of this was, in my view, pretty clear by the early 50s, but by now it's been well established by experiment. Lilac Lightman's work, her associates and others. So
But here
much of what the
child may assume we're mainly talking about grammatical structure and not things like vocabulary, where the vocabulary really has to depend upon the experience within the this speaking community, because if the words aren't there, you're not going to learn words you can extend.
Yeah, that's the paradigm example. But even that example doesn't work for the reasons I mentioned. So if you want to know whether that thing over there is called tree, you have to have in your mind already, coded in your brain before this experience altogether, you have to have the set of possible phonological forms, which is very narrow and restricted. That's given by nature. You have to have the set of concepts, all given by nature. And the one thing you learn is pretty trivial. Just associate this possible form with this possible concept. Now you can learn that in 2 or 3 presentations. But then all the rich knowledge about the meaning of the word and the pronunciation of the word is already available. In fact, Gleitman's work has actually shown that a couple of presentations, 2 or 3, is enough for the child to acquire the sound meaning correspondence and know the nature of the word with all of its richness and complexity.
Well, there is some behavioral people doing similar kinds of things.
Paradigmatic case of learning involves extremely rich innate structure. And more than that, the laws of phonology themselves are determined in part by just computational efficiency principles.
But they're going to be different in different languages, right? So what about the where I have trouble?
Gracias por ver este vídeo, os dejamos por aquí un enlace a nuestra última formación y por aquí algunos vídeos que os pueden resultar de interés. Si estáis buscando ayuda psicológica, también podéis mirar en la descripción del vídeo donde encontraréis nuestra web y podréis solicitar asistencia terapéutica de un profesional confiable y que os ofrecerá ayuda psicológica basada en evidencia científica.